I'd like to ask you to think for just a moment about what the first thing is that comes to your mind when I say the word city. With our cities becoming more and more dense and our growing ecological challenges, we're going to have to really think about how we want to live in our cities in the future. Is it that we have to move out of the cities like we heard just 2 talks ago as soon as we have children? Or can we create better spaces? This is a picture of the Mauer Park, karaoke in the Mauer Park, and an Irish guy just packed out his equipment and started doing karaoke for free. And it grew, and now thousands of people come every weekend to appreciate what he initiated. It's what I love about the city. Anybody can participate. Anybody can affect the way other people go about their lives. What happens on the street here in the Oderbergerstrasse, just close to that Mauer Park, people just started planting flowers. It grew, and then the Ordnungsamt came, the orderliness agency, and said, no, wait, this can't be like this. But the people continued, and they got together, and they said, no, it has to be like this. This is our street. We want to make it like that. Now this idea has expanded. And there you see a little building site that also has a little implementation. Whole unused sites have been taken over, made into urban gardening, like the Prinzessinnengarten, which have expanded. But it's not only about the unused spaces that we can take over and do temporary interventions or green interventions. Let's have a look at the built space. When I moved to Berlin in 1991, or when I first came here, East Berlin looked like this. It was pretty fascinating, though, as a young kid, really, just fresh out of architecture school, to see all of this amazing spaces, but it was nearly empty. There were no flagship stores, there were no bars, restaurants, there was hardly a place to buy food. There was about 1 cafe on Hackischer Markt, and now there's no empty space, right? So it was a place that was empty and waiting to be filled up and taken over and changed with new ideas. And people started doing just that. This is a picture right of Hackischer Markt where some architecture students at the time, Jan and Tim Edler, just cut open the roof in their house and made it into a convertible. And that's just one example. And in the years following, of course, Berlin was renovated very quickly, and lots of really average small flats were created by investors. But all of these people who were actively transforming the city, making new shops and bars and everything that's there now, at the same time, Berlin became the city with the highest birth rate in all of Europe. But none of these people were ready to just move out to the suburbs. They said, well, what about all of these empty spaces left over? What can we do there? They started to form groups, and they started to think about, well, how do we want to live in the city? How can we fill up these spaces, go to architects, develop ideas, and create a new kind of housing? And it has to suit our needs, it has to be affordable. And over the last 10 years or so in Berlin, hundreds of these sorts of projects have happened. And they've defined new processes of actually producing architecture or producing spaces in the city, not only living but working spaces. And they've defined new standards in what can be built for what price. This is just a little excerpt of a map of Prenzlauer Berg, where a lot of these projects started. There were a lot of holes there to be filled up. And I'd like to ask if the concept of maybe, like, is there a critical mass of good projects or a critical mass of people doing things that can affect the surrounding area, the area around them? And also ask, well, what is it about these projects, or what is it about living in the city that we need to have? What makes a good project? What qualities are we looking for in order to create a city with a sustainable future? Well, if you get together as a group to build something, the first thing you need to ask is, what can we do together that we can't do alone? And many groups, this is a very early project, many groups decided to share space. Not only the stair house that everybody needs to share and the place where you put your trash, but In this case, they took the entire roof space. The space could have been built. So an investor on the market would sell the space as the very most expensive space in the building. But they said, well, we're not selling it. We're going to live there by ourselves. We can do what we want, and we all want to live at the top. We all want to have a roof space. So they made a guest apartment with a kitchen in this huge roof space. But it's not only about the big spaces. It's also about the small spaces. What can you do in order to create an ideal living space? Just makes life easy and makes living in the city for everyone, not just, dinks, single, double income, no kids, or whatever they all used to call them. Just a toilet on the ground floor, for example, so that when the kids are playing in the courtyard, they don't have to go up to the 6th floor to go to the bathroom, or they don't all go to the 1st floor, and everybody, you have 10 kids coming in if you live on the 1st floor. Some people have shared a workshop. They said, we don't all need to buy the same tools. We'll have a workshop, and everybody puts their tools there. One person, some share a sauna or a guest room. One project even built a pool. And for some projects, it's not even about the built space that they share, but sharing their garden space. All of the projects that I looked at have shared green space in the courtyard or on the roof. None of them have parceled off the green space and divided it up. They all share this open space. But some of them have even done an extra measure and open up their privately paid for private space that they could put a fence around, but they've opened it up to the public, to the neighborhood. This is a pocket park in Prenzlauer Berg. There's no fence. The people enter that house right from this courtyard, right off of the street. And this is a larger project in Weißensee, where many projects share a very large garden space, and there's no fence. They could have put one there. They didn't have to open it up, but they've chosen to make it open to the public. And this sharing of space in any way really strengthens the community and helps to give people a sense of responsibility, not only the owners, but also the community, and helps to make good neighborhoods. And we need to be able to have choice about where we're living, the way we want to live, in the planning phase, not later. And we need to be able to personalize our spaces in order to accommodate people with special needs, be it with children or many other different kinds of special needs. This is a project where the group wasn't allowed to build balconies. I mean, of course they wouldn't have a balcony, so what could they do? So they decided to commission an artist together with the architect to make fold-out balconies. And you can imagine how the space can be divided over time. That was a goal of one of the Ritterstrasse project. That the choice could be they could choose from a whole palette of different kinds of elements. Even the way their windows could open to the right or the left, or 5 different kinds of elements. And they decided, oh, let's make our flats really small and share a lot of space. Over 22% of the building is shared space. And that way, they said, it's really flexible for them in the future because they can change and use more of this common space. And in order to accommodate to these special needs, you have to find ways to change the building over time. And one of the things I love about living in the city is just being able to go out the door and see all different kinds of people coming and going, to be able to go shopping around the corner here and there, to meet people by chance, to go by cafes with people sitting there where I think, oh, I'd like to sit there too, but I have to go to work. And this was one of the goals of this project in the Oderberger Straße from Bar Architects. They said, we need to make a hybrid building so that it fits exactly into the kind of city that we want to have. And if we zoom into the top part where the living spaces are, you can see that there's a larger section, 80 square meters. They said it's the ideal. And we combined it together with a 40 square meter apartment. They can always be divided off. They actually have 2 entrances, so it can very easily be divided off. And that can be used for example, when the kids grow up and they need their own privacy, or later they move out entirely, you can rent it out to a student, or maybe you need a nurse later, so you can, there's actually an 80-year-old woman living in this building, or at least when it was finished, and as well as families. And of course, they share the roof. This is an interior of one of the apartments. The one for the 80-year-old woman looks entirely different. And if we go a floor down to the center part of the building, they said, well, there's studio spaces that can be used either as studio workspaces or as short-term rental apartments. So in this way, they can use the same kind of space and adapt it depending on the financial needs or the economic changes. When they built this building, for example, it wasn't an area where you could just rent out office space. It just wasn't needed. Too many ground floor areas weren't rented out. But so the concept of the building has adapted and changed over time. And on the ground floor, oh, I went back. On the ground floor, there's not only a restaurant and a shop, but also a little cubbyhole art space, which really gives back something to the urban neighborhood that they're in. And so it's of utmost importance in our cities in the future that we don't just build housing block, working building, and parking garages underneath, because there's no way that the city that we want to have can work in that way. So this is a passive house, passive building. It uses no more energy than it actually creates itself. And the self-made projects that I looked at all build to the highest ecological standards, even invest in new ecological technologies. Over half of them were passive technologies. We need investors that will invest in the future, invest in new technologies, and invest in experimentation. On the one side is a 7-story wooden construction. It's using regrowing materials, and it's the first 7-story all wooden construction in all of Europe. And on the other side, a building using recycled materials and a super low-cost construction. And the solutions that we need experimentation, because the solutions that we try out today are going to be, what we try out today is going to be the solution in the future. And we need new kinds of architectural forms in order to accommodate new lifestyles, changing lifestyles. What you see in the background is the old closed block. Nobody really wants to live in the back, especially not in the back on the ground floor. You never ever see the light of day. So how do you solve that situation in a really tight site in the city? And Zanderroth architects came up with the townhouses at the front and 2 stacked double-story houses or triple-story houses at the back. And they all share this wonderful courtyard. All of them have really beautiful light in their apartments. And it's just this new way of thinking about what can be built in a certain space that help us to have new ideas. Now, self-investing, self-made projects, people who decide what to spend their money on, what to invest in, and what to save on, creates a completely new relationship between what you can get for your money, what you can actually make all of the decisions yourself. And these projects have been saving generally at least a minimum of 20% over what you can normally buy on the normal market. But they don't have to be ownership-based. They can also be co-op associations. So what's the problem? We, as a group, need much more time to buy a site or to get a site than a normal investor would. So by the time it takes a group to get all formed up, get their idea going, go to the bank, the investor has already bought the site. The bigger the site, the bigger the group you need to fill the site, and the more time it takes. So normally the investor has one idea, he goes to the bank, gets the money, starts to build the city, and there it goes. And the people living or working there, they pay their bank. So what about them? What would they build if they could? And what about the city? What kind of modern mechanisms does the city have in order to say what they want to have built in the city? What kind of mechanisms do they have today in order to determine what the city should look like in the future? So an investor makes his decisions based on profitability. A user will look, of course, into the long term. What's going to happen in 20 years and 30 years? What do they really need? And therefore, there's a whole entirely different set of decision-making rules. So if we had more self-using investors, we would go from being consumers, just being able to buy what's offered on the market, to being pioneers, to choosing what we want. And the results are different. So we need to change the process for the future, and it's not that difficult. The city needs to set up a short list of criteria, the ones that we went through, that determine what is a good development concept. And the people come together, just like they've been doing in these co-op, co-housing associations and co-op projects. They get their ideas together and they form groups based on what they want, and build up a user-based program. And the city needs to say, well, the land, they don't have to just give it away for free. Nobody's asking for that. They just need to set a price and say, this is the price, and now now we have a competition. Whoever has the best concept can build on this site. This can also apply to a private owner of a site. But if this is the stipulation, set price, it doesn't have to be cheap, it can even be expensive, but it's just set and has a certain amount of time for the people to apply with their best concept. And in the end, the banks will know that they're supporting a really good, viable future project. So it's not a utopian idea that we even have one project that finally actually succeeded in doing this in Berlin. It's right beside the Radialsystem. It's the site along the Spree River. It's very close to the center of town. It's to Alexanderplatz. And it's the Holzmark Plus Association. And they're going to have a whole publicly open promenade of green space along the riverside, and a whole mix of different functions, they've set really high ecological goals, and not only working, but living spaces not only for certain people, but lots of different kinds of people, student housing This is their vision of their village in the future. And these are the first seedlings along the riverside before it gets built. Now, I'd like you to think again about, when I say the word city, not only what comes to mind, but what you would do, how you want to live in the city in the future. And this is an image that Kai-Uwe Bergmann showed at the very beginning this morning. So I'm glad I have this too. This is Realities United vision of how we can swim in the inner city. What you might not know is that they were not commissioned to do this project. This was their own project. They just said, we've got to come up with this, we've got to do this. This is the most important thing in the city. And now they've won international awards for this, and they've got the engineering down, and we can do it. It's possible to make this happen. And it's possible, the more self-made projects, the more self-initiated projects that happen in the city, the better our cities will become in the future. And together, we can make our cities better. Thank you.